going. Okay. We're going to start when I talk about resistance training, well, assuming it will advance. Okay. Lots of things can fall under the umbrella of resistance training. Okay. Most people think of, though, they think of lifting weights. Okay. And most of you probably think of like bench press, shoulder press, curls, squats, power clean, whatever they're doing at CrossFit in those ways, right? But it can be things beyond all of that. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, probably not today, but on Monday, because some of our much more recent scientific kind of understanding of things has changed a little bit of what it is that we actually know. And that's part of the other reason I'm showing you guys some old data. Here's what we thought we knew, now here's some new stuff that will be a little bit different. Okay, but very, very big picture, right? Why do we resistance train? If we went over, let's say we went to Steve right now, or went to Crunch right now, and we went to the weight room and we talked to somebody and said, why are you here? What are you going to tell us?
They want to get stronger.
They want to get stronger. Okay, very reasonable. Why do they want to be stronger? Healthier, okay? It's a very nuanced and sort of answer. What we think the average person at Crunch is, you know, I'm here because I want to be healthier. And no, we're thinking, no, absolutely not. No. What else?
Want to look better?
They want to look better. What do we think that people mean when they say that?
Bigger.
Bigger, go.
Bigger tone. Oh God. Okay, we used the word. Thank you. Remind me of your name.
Maddie.
Maddie. Maddie used a word that is commonly used. This is my least favorite word for anything describing resistance training. You said tone. What do we think people mean when they say, I want to be toned? Low body fat, okay? Right? I want to have muscles that people can see in some ways, right? How do you get toned? When we don't want to talk about that. We don't want to use that word. But how do I get a lower body fat percentage? Pardon?
Lose body.
Okay. How would I do that, Chloe? How would I lose body fat? Is it this?
No.
Very, very rarely is it going to be this. Okay. It's also probably not running. Oh, sure as shit ain't walking on the treadmill at a 5% incline and you're back talking on your phone. Okay. It's hard to burn enough calories when you do that. Those are good things to do from a health perspective. This is a great thing to do from I want to build muscle, I want to build strength, and that can be helpful. But really, to be toned, you got to stop eating Taco Bell. The reason I am not very toned. I was once, but that was because I was 20 and, you know, I could just do whatever I wanted. I will tell all of you that if you think you need whatever you want right now, it will come for you too. Okay? Just tell them, right? Tell them. Okay. But we said I want to be toned. A lot of people think like I want to be big, right? I have bigger muscles. I want to make my muscles bigger, right? Vanity's okay, right? Whatever we got to use to motivate ourselves to do those things. And then some people, maybe not the folks at Steel or at Crunch or even over at Sarkis or something here, people are interested in improving physical function, improving exercise performance, right? There's some thought that if my muscles are bigger and stronger, I can run faster, I can jump higher. This is mostly correct, okay? Or we also got to think about from a function standpoint, you all probably don't very often. You put your hands up. Anybody go to anybody take a bath this morning? No? Okay, so people are like, oh God, no. Okay. Anybody climb some stairs this morning? Up or down? Yeah, okay, I see you don't put your hands up. Right? Anybody sit on the toilet and then stand up? Okay? Right? Do you know what that takes? Strength. Right? Do you think that when you get to be older, you're gonna have as easy a time doing that as you do right now? All these things you don't think of right now, at some point there is some minimum level of strength, which requires likely some minimum amount of muscle that imparts some physical function. Okay? This has been one of the big advents of the last, say, 15 years is a huge push on everyone needs to resistance train. Says the guy that's not resistant training very often. Everyone needs to resistance train. It is really important and really good for us. From a health perspective, from a function perspective, because strength imparts function. Okay? All right. Now, what we're going to talk about over the next couple of days, in some ways, is what's the stimulus? If my goal is to have bigger muscles and stronger muscles, what do I need to do, okay, in order to make that happen? Okay? What do I need to do? Is there some optimum thing? And the answer is probably yes, but as I was talking to some folks after class the other day, what we're really gonna kind of top line take away is that we gotta do something. Okay? So that's like 85% of it is just doing something consistently. Okay, and the last 15% maybe, yeah, set to 3 or set to 4, or 80% of one rep max versus 60%, and right, this sort of split or whatever, like that stuff matters on the margin, but the big deal is you need to go squat, period. You need to go do some push-ups, you need to go do shoulder press, whatever it is, you gotta go. That's gonna be the big thing. We'll talk about what changes, and then we'll talk a lot about, well, not a lot, but a little bit about some of the mechanisms, okay? Why do your muscles get bigger? Well, they get more protein put into them. You make more actin and myosin. Well, where does that come from? Well, it comes from turning on genes in muscle fibers that are located in the nucleus of those fibers. And so something has to tell the nucleus, hey, make more actin and myosin. So we'll try to get into a little bit, just a very, very little bit of all of that. Okay, a little bit of the role of some anabolic hormones, okay, which you guys have plenty of right now, my guess. I'm right at that age where mine's beginning to start to go down, okay? Comes for all of us, okay? So we'll talk about those two things. Then we're gonna get these last couple of ideas, which hopefully you guys have seen before in either personal training or advanced strength and conditioning, or in health and fitness. But how and why does training work? And so we're gonna talk about kind of two big principles from a practical standpoint. Okay. The first is going to be something that's not listed here. It's what is called progressive overload. Okay, progressive overload. And progressive overload is the idea that whatever I'm doing, my body will adapt to that. Okay. And that limits this disruption of homeostasis. I'm used to walking a mile, I'm used to lifting 100 pounds, whatever it is, okay? And so in order to get more adaptations, I gotta do more. Whatever you're used to doing, you gotta do more. More weight, more reps, more sets, another day a week, another exercise, whatever it is, more. To drive and stimulate that change, I gotta do more. And then I adapt to that, and then I do more again. Okay, and again, and again, and again. And if you don't do that, you don't disrupt homeostasis, and therefore you cannot continue to adapt. When you're untrained, it's easy to adapt. Everything is new, everything is overload. When you're really, really well trained, then you really gotta get creative and do some things. Okay, that's the idea of progressive overload. We'll come back to that. That's gonna get us at our stimulus in a lot of ways. Okay. The other idea, and it's going to be related a little bit to the stimulus, but a lot about what changes, is the idea of training specificity. Okay. This means whatever you do, that's what you get better at. Okay. You want to be better at squatting, you got to squat, you don't need a bench press. You want to get better at squatting a very, very heavy weight, you need to squat a very heavy weight. Okay. And a lot of the idea behind specificity is the muscles that we use are the ones that will adapt. Okay. The muscles that we use are the ones that are going to get the neural adaptations to be better at recruiting their motor units, right? And they're going to get better at doing that through whatever range of motion you lift, however much weight you're lifting, however number of sets or reps. So you adapt to whatever it is that you're doing. That's what you get better at. Okay. And this is where things get a little dicey from a practical standpoint. We have some evidence that if we make you squat and we increase quad strength, glute strength, that it will likely make you a little bit better at sprinting and jumping because you use those muscles very heavily in all of that. That's not a panacea. You want to be a better sprinter? Guess what you got to do? Sprint, right? Sprint. That's the unfortunate part. You want to be a better jumper? You got to jump. Okay. And so we cannot oversell, right, resistance training and transferring what we're doing here out to a lot of functional things, especially on the very topic. Okay. Especially on the topic. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. Okay. Okay. So I have this and I made this because it helps me to understand what we're doing. Okay. And so they tell us, and I don't know if it ever comes through or not, that we do actually think about what we're teaching sometimes. They tell us when you teach, one of the key things is to start at the end. Okay, start at the end. What do we want you guys to know and be able to do when you leave our class, when you leave a lecture? And so we know where we want to get to, and we can figure out where we start and how we get there. I like to think of adaptations to training in the same way. It makes sense to me to start at the end. Okay, so let's start with our training goal. Okay, start with the training goal. We're a little late for everything, right? But we got about a month or about 3.5 weeks until spring break, right? We're a little late to get started on our get toned plan for spring break if we're going to the beach. But let's say that we did those things. But if my goal is, let's just say, okay, by the end of the semester, I want to be able to squat, I don't know, 300 pounds. Pick some number, whatever much more we have from that. Okay. If that's my goal, then let's think backwards. Okay. What do I need to change basically in order to be able to achieve that goal? I need bigger muscles. I need to be better at recruitment. I need to be better at activation. I need to be better at using my exception muscle, whatever that is. Okay. That's the thing. Based upon what your goal is, work backwards and then figure out what has to change in order to get me to that goal. Okay. And so these are things that I like to call chronic or kind of longer term changes, like bigger muscles, increased strength. That's the adaptation, right? I need to adapt my muscles and nervous system to achieve this, which will then let me get my goal. So then the question is, well, if that's what I want the adaptation to be, what do I need to do? What is the stimulus that I need to put into practice every time I go to work out? Okay. In order to drive those particular changes and not some other ones. Okay. And so that stimulus is very likely going to be a disruptive homeostasis in a very, very particular way. I disrupt homeostasis by excess force, by fatigue, in the muscles that I want to adapt and those kinds of things. That's my stimulus. Okay. That disruption of homeostasis is the result of sort of acute changes from my one bout of exercise. Okay. So when you go work out today, you have some longer term goal so that when you work out today, you are going to cause changes during and immediately after that one bout of resistance training, whatever that might be. That provides a disruption of homeostasis, which drives or provides a stimulus, which drives adaptations. And if you do that chronically over and over and over and over and over again, then eventually you will get these adaptations that will let you reach your training goal. Okay. Does that make sense to you guys? You kind of see how we're doing this, because you want to think about, depending upon what your goal is, I want to do different things here because I need different acute changes to get different chronic adaptations. Okay. So not everything that we do is going to drive the same kind of change. And so we need to try to understand all of that so that we can train in the proper way. Okay. All right. So I've already talked about progressive overload. We're kind of talking about what our stimulus is. Part of the other thing to get at in a very practical sense though, is how do we get overload? Okay, how are we gonna overload? All right, so. We can pick someone and have them like stand up and do squats. You want me to pick somebody? No? Or do you want to get up and do squats?
It's better than that, it's better than sitting on the bus for about 6 hours.
Great, we have a volunteer, so you might, right, you start doing squats, right? Okay, so he's doing squats, all right? Now, if I wanted to overload him, could we choose a different exercise than this? Do you think? We could give him a barbell, maybe? Some things we could do it that way. We could put a backpack on him that had some more weight in it. Brittany, how you feeling, bud?
Good.
Feeling good?
Yeah.
Your depth's leaving a little bit to be desired here, right? My dad, the football coach, is like, I can't put my cup of coffee on your, and rest it on your thigh then when we go all the way down. Okay? So he's doing some number of reps. We could increase his reps. You could increase his sets, right? You feeling overloaded yet?
A little bit.
A little bit?
Yeah.
Okay, now go down and just stay there. Just go down and hold. There we go. That's better. Okay? We could change his rest periods. You could shorten your rest period in between sets. Okay? Or you could change the order. We're gonna do bodyweight squats. We're gonna have to do some leg presses. We could switch our orders around or add another thing. Okay? Feeling overloaded yet?
Now I'm starting to feel it, yeah.
Now we're starting to feel it. Okay. Good. All right. Thank you.
After I don't even know how many squats.
It's okay. So when we look at your training protocol, okay, when we look at things, you can pick out and alter all of these things in a very thoughtful manner in order to get some level of overload. Okay. As we talked about on Monday at the very end, okay, in people that are basically untrained, everything causes overload. Okay, everything is an overload. I carried Ellis up our stairs the other day on my shoulder. And admittedly, I mean, she's a sort of large child at this point. She weighs almost 50 pounds. I carried her up our stairs. And I felt it. Tells because I'm woefully untrained. Okay? And so that was enough to overload me. But if the assumption is that I begin to train, then I got to look at these kind of things. Of these things, okay, the easiest way to achieve overload is just lift more weight. It's just to up the intensity, okay? It's just to up the intensity. Also, probably the thing that most people miss on the most. Upping intensity or trying to continue to get progressive overload is hard. It's uncomfortable, okay? And we don't like to be uncomfortable, right? Told you guys we're being the New York Times, they've got new data. This idea that they think that because we used to be hunter-gatherers and we were so active that our brains are then programmed that when we don't have to be active to be hunter-gatherers, that if we want to be couch potatoes, because then we don't use any extra energy. So, I know that made me feel better about myself. It's not my fault, but I'm not lazy. My brain is just programmed to be lazy, right? In those ways. And so that's why promoting these things is so important. Okay. So that's part of our stimulus. We've got to get this idea of overload. Okay. Now, we said the other day, right, that if you have really, really untrained people, that you may be able to experience in, say, 12 or 16 weeks, up to maybe 100% increase in strength. You can double how much you can lift, okay? Most people over 3 to 6 months are going to be able to gain somewhere between about 25 and 100% strength. More strength gains doing concentric, eccentric contractions, which is what we typically do when we lift weights, right? Up, down, con-ec, as opposed to isometric. I'll talk about why that's different in the next slide, okay? But you can have these very pronounced strength gains. Not everybody will get stronger, okay? I'll show you guys some data on the next slide. Not everybody gets stronger, okay? That's a problem, Okay, that's the problem, but that's the thing. Misnomers. Men and women, old people up to about the age of 80 or 85, and young people gain strength similarly from a percentage of where they start. Okay? I think I mentioned on Monday that until the mid-90s, they thought that you ladies could not gain as much strength as men, because if y'all could lift 50 pounds and it went up to then 75 pounds, and the guy could lift 100 and it went up to 150, they'd be like, see, the guys can gain 50 more pounds, they can lift 50 more pounds, the ladies can only do 25. Well, as a percentage, it's exactly the same. It's a 50% increase in strength. Never occurred to anyone until the 90s to do this. I don't know why. Our history of not being nice to ladies in exercise physiology or science in general is vast. But we've solved that problem, okay? Men, women, old, young. What do you guys think is the single biggest factor in how much strength you can gain?
Genetics.
Okay, outside of genetics very much so, but outside of genetics, what's the single biggest factor? What question should we ask everybody in class if we want to know who has the greatest and the least potential to gain strength with resistance training?
Have you done resistance training before?
Have I done resistance training before? Are you currently resistance training? Okay. State of training. How often you're doing resistance training is the biggest predictor of initial sort of gains. If you're not doing things, much bigger chance you're going to get a bigger increase. Okay. If we account for all of that, then yes, genetics is very important. We all have those friends that look at the weight room and they get huge, right? Hate them. And those kinds of things. Okay, but that's the thing. It's often related to initial strength and then genetic potential. When we gain strength, okay, there are two things, there's two big areas that are gonna play a role here. One of those is what we're gonna call a neural adaptation. Okay, a neural adaptation. These are adaptations that are going to take place proximal to the neuromuscular junction. Okay, and our whole big signaling thing, which I appreciate many of you finding ways to integrate that into your test, even though I didn't ask about it. We asked about excitation, contraction coupling, and about half of y'all wrote the whole thing, which is great, right? It's in there. You're like, I learned this, Dr. Black, by God, I'm gonna write it. I appreciate it, but motor cortex, okay, spinal cord, motor neurons, neural adaptations. There are changes there. Changes in our ability to tell the muscle or signal the muscle to turn on. And then the second component is going to be hypertrophy, or what we oftentimes call contractile protein adaptations. This is, I get bigger muscle. Okay? I get more actin, I get more myosin, therefore I have more cross bridges. If I can generate more cross bridges, then what happens? I can lift more weight. Force comes from cross bridges. You can make more in theory than you have stronger muscle. Okay. Okay. We will dig into these two things in the coming slides. The time course, or when each of these things happens, okay, in relation to the number of workouts you've done and how long you've been training differs, okay? And the contribution of them is going to change over time. And it's going to change in some ways also upon, like, if you've been training for years and years, then you may max out some of those kinds of things. So we'll get into that in the coming slides. Okay. So I fancy myself to be a scientist. Okay. The university tells me that I'm a scientist. We'll see how that goes. So I want you guys to think like a scientist. as a scientist, we have to be open. Okay, this is one of the hardest things that drives my wife, the history major, crazy. As a scientist, we have to be open-minded enough that when we are presented with compelling data, that we are willing to change our mind, that we are willing to change our priors, that we are willing to go against what maybe our personal experience may tell us, okay? So, one of the ways that we can be more certain of data and believe data, some studies or some data over others, is by how many people are tested in a particular study, okay? These are data, okay? They were published in 2005, so right when I was sort of a baby doctoral student. But there's almost 600 people in this study. To my knowledge, this is the single largest research study or research trial on the effects of resistance training, okay? And so what they were looking for with this, everybody did the same thing, okay? They did bicep curls on one arm. These were people that had not done any sort of bicep training in the previous 6 months, okay? It's about half men and half women, okay? And they did 12 weeks of training. And so you guys can look at this. In the first 4 weeks, they did 3 sets of 12 with their 12 rep max. So remember, a rep max, that means they could do 12 repetitions and they could not do a 13. So I give you a weight, we figure out how much weight you can lift 12 times, and I say do that 3 times, you get 3 sets. Then in the next 4 weeks, they did 3 sets of 8. And then in the final 4 weeks, they did 3 sets of 6, okay? Now, finishing with the heavier weight probably played some role in their strength gains. We can argue about hair splitting on if this is the optimum way to gain strength or the optimum way to hypertrophy our muscles. The data is a little bit kind of out there. But what you see here, these are what are called histograms, okay? Anybody have statistics? Y'all know what a histogram is, okay? What this is showing us basically is the percentage of our nearly 600 participants that fell into a particular range of strength gains or hypertrophy, okay? I should note that they measured their muscle size using an MRI. So it's incredibly accurate, okay? It's incredibly accurate. And so here's 1 rep max strength gains, okay? We have men in the dark bars, women in the light bars, and this is the percentage of the men or the percentage of the women that gained a certain amount of strength, okay? So there were about 12 or 13% of women that gained essentially 100%. They doubled their strength, okay? Whereas there were only about 2% of men that were, all right? If we look at it this way, women on average increase their strength by about 64%, men by about 50%. Okay? Why did the women get stronger? What's the most likely, please? They weren't as strong to begin with. Why might they not have been as strong to begin with?
Untrained.
They had less training history, right? Probably so. Okay, that's my guess. But look at this. There are some people, some men, some women, that basically didn't get any stronger. Okay, and then we have some people, like there's a lady that was out there that got like almost 250% stronger. Okay, and so most people though fell kind of in this looks sort of like a bell curve, like a normal distribution here, sort of in the middle, in this kind of somewhere around between about 25 and 30 and maybe 60% of an increase, okay? We need all of these people to help us kind of understand this variability, because there are some people that get almost no increases and some that get a very, very large increase. And they all theoretically reported that they hadn't been training for 6 months beforehand. And so you can make an argument that they were all relatively similar to begin with. So some of this maybe is training history, but a lot of this may also be genetic. Okay? Here, okay, here is isometric strength change. So this is hold, do a curl, like, 90 degrees of flexion, do isometric strength. They did not train isometric, they trained doing up, down, they trained dynamically. And so you see a much smaller increase in isometric strength. This illustrates training specificity. Okay, training specificity. You see the much tighter normal distribution here as well. Isometric strength is much less variable. It's a much better measure from a research perspective because you don't got to worry about range of motion and a whole bunch of other kinds of things. It's much more dependent upon sort of their change in actual muscle size. Okay, here men and women are much sort of similar in this one. Okay, so I show you all these data to try to illustrate that when I say that, on average, people are going to be between 25 and 100, it's likely based upon these data. Okay, there are plenty of other studies that are much smaller that show larger average gains, smaller average gains. They fall in that range somewhere. But I would say that we need to pay attention to this because the study is so big. These are kind of robust, very believable data in that particular. And that's why I'm going to tell you. It's not that smaller studies are wrong or that their methods were worse or anything. It's just we need to be more convinced because there's so many more people here. We're able to capture much more variation in things. Okay. Okay. So why do these people get stronger? Well, one of the first reasons is these neural adaptations. Okay. So how many of you know how to roller skate? Anybody roller skate? Okay. Hello, Grace, you roller skater? When's the last time you roller skated? High school? Okay. My daughter wanted roller skates for Christmas, so we got her roller skates. She thought she would put them on and just be like roller girl or something, and roller derby right from the very start. It's crazy. And then we put them on and she gets out there and she falls right down and does not understand why she is not instantly the world's best roller skater. Okay? Other than roller skates in high school, I know that's not that long ago for you in the same way that it would be for me. You would put roller skates on, you could be passable at doing it right now. Okay? You remember how to roller skate. What does that mean to remember? It's not like I remember a fact, right? You remember a motor pattern. Your brain remembers how to do that activity. Okay? No, people don't do this anymore. You guys can ride a bike. Right? Not an electric scooter, but an actual bike.
Yeah.
In those things. Yeah, y'all can ride a bike. When did you learn how to ride a bike?
2 years ago.
2 years ago?
2 years ago.
2. Okay. That's cool. Welcome to the club. Right. My daughter's also learning how to lead. She got a bike for Christmas. Well, maybe the bike was for her birthday. I don't know. My parents buy her way too much shit. It's great. We love them. I mean, I'm an only child. She's the only grandchild. I mean, she gets whatever she wants.
So that you gotta love grandparents.
It's what they're there for, right? They're there to spoil them. And my dad's a big bike rider, and so of course Alice has this bike that, costs more than, I don't know, my first car probably, and these kinds of things. And she's gonna outgrow it, and she can't anyway. She's desperate to take the training wheels off, but she can't ride without the training wheels yet. Right? And she does that, and then she falls over, and then she gets real pissed, and then doesn't want to do it anymore. So we're working on perseverance and some things. But learning effects, neural adaptations, okay, are motor patterns. You haven't forgotten how to ride a bike from the first time that you learn. Once you learn how to do a curl, or to do a squat, or to do a power clean, which I have PTSD over, and things, you don't forget, okay? And because as you train, as you do it often, you're gonna get these adaptations. Okay, the brain remembers what muscles to turn on, which muscles to recruit, in what order to recruit them, at what precise moment to recruit them. And that is sort of this idea of a neural adaptation, okay? So when we do this, okay, you start lifting today. Anybody, you all had health and fitness, right? Oh, I had like 2 of y'all in health and fitness. So, you guys remember in health and fitness, we did the lab where we did the bench press?
Yes.
Okay, some of you probably had never done a bench press before, right? It's usually one of my favorite days when we have class. So people have never bench pressed before, okay? Never bench pressed. If I pick something to have you guys do it today, you've never done it before, we come back next Monday, you'll be able to lift more weight than you could today, okay? You probably gonna lift more weight tomorrow than you can today. Very fast, very, very fast, okay? And it's this learning effect, okay? Neural adaptations occur quickly, within 1 or 2 bouts of training. And the things that change are your ability to recruit high threshold or especially type 2X motor units. Many of us are not good at recruiting those motor units for activities that we're not accustomed to doing, okay? We increase something called synchronization of motor unit recruitment. What does synchronization mean to you? Contracting at the same time, okay? So we get synchronization, a couple of things happen. One, the motor units that go to the same muscle all fire in a way where they their firings line up with each other. But also you get synchronization of multiple muscles that are going to contribute to force production when you have more complex motor patterns, right? When I do a bench press or a squat or a power clean, right, I'm not just using one muscle. I'm not just contracting across one joint, okay? And so as I do things and practice and get better, I synchronize motor unit recruitment. So I turn on the motor units to each muscle at the same time better. And I synchronize, right, quads and glutes together. Or I synchronize delts and pecs together. Or triceps and pecs together on a bench press, whatever that's going to be. Okay? These things are incredibly difficult for us to measure in a very kind of easy and straightforward way. I'll show you guys a little bit of data, but a lot of this we're just kind of taking from some animal model things and just kind of our best guesses. We also know, we have very good data on this, that especially when you lift heavy weights, you turn off or you down-regulate the sensitivity of your Golgi tendon organs in that muscle. So if I squat heavy, okay, when I squat heavy, I start down-regulating how sensitive my GTOs and the patella tendon are. You can do this if you want to get better at squatting, put a lot of weight on the rack, get in the rack, and then just stand there with the heavy weight. You can train your GTOs just by holding the heavy weight. You don't have to do any kind of contraction, okay? Get a couple of buddies, have them help you unrack it and just stand there. And you can train your GTOs, okay? We have a little bit of data on this, but it's really tricky. We also think that we may be able to increase firing rate. And in addition to turning on more motor units, we can also try to max out the number of motor units that we can get up onto the flat part of the force frequency kind of firing rate curve. Okay? You guys remember that from 2 weeks ago? Yes? Okay. So these are kind of the primary things. And the first one's the really big one, okay? The big neural adaptation is you are better able to recruit the motor units in the muscle that you already have. Okay? That's the big things. Occurs very quickly, maybe after one bout, and it occurs way before there's any increase in actual muscle size or cross-section area. Okay? They're also a problem though. They're a problem from an adherence standpoint. Okay? Because people get frustrated. You are new to doing something, And you go and work out and you get a lot stronger really, really fast. Like every time you go, you're gonna be able to lift more weight than you could beforehand. People like, it's pleasing to us to see these gains, right? This increase in strength. I'm making progress. And then we get out at about 6 weeks or 8 weeks or thereabouts. And it really levels off and it starts to stop in that way. And then people are like, well, I'm not getting any stronger anymore, right? What's happening? Is it not working? And they get frustrated and they quit. Okay, so they occur quickly, but they will taper off after a couple of months. And then that's when our adherence thing is going to become a bit of an issue. Okay? They are very, 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 very specific to muscle group that you're using, through the range of motion that you're using, okay? And at the force level that you're used to doing, okay? This is where the idea of specificity really manifests itself, okay? Where it really manifests itself. This is as good a spot as any for me to kind of mention this. I don't have a slide on this. I will put some data on and add it for the end of things on Monday, okay? If you want to maximize your increases in strength with resistance training, all you need to do is go and lift your 1 rep max every time you go to work. Okay? Because that maximizes your neural adaptations to trying to lift very, very heavy. Okay? There have been some fascinating experiments that have been done. One by a guy that was a PhD student here and finished the year that I came, and he essentially took my job at Ole Miss. But they did 1 rep max testing 4 times a week for 8 weeks, and then they had another group that did kind of a traditional 4 days per week, 3 or 4 sets a day, kind of traditional resistance training. And they look at the very end in the 1 rep max group. Their muscles didn't get any bigger, but they got stronger. They were stronger than the group that did the other things because of these neural adaptations. Okay, so we're going to talk about that the things that improve strength the most may be a little bit different than the things that lead to the biggest increases in muscle because of these neural adaptations, because of specificity. It's the idea if you want to lift a heavy weight, you still practice lifting a heavy weight. So that's a really important thing. Neural adaptations. Let me ask the question. Some of y'all can put hands up. How many of you have been resistance training relatively consistently for more than, say, 3 years? Okay. More than 5 years. Okay, it's kind of the same group. Been doing it for 3, you've been doing it for 5. Okay. Any of y'all want to comment? Feel like you're still increasing muscle size in the way that you were early on? I know y'all are in a weird group because if you've been doing it for 5 years, y'all are still like barely on the end, like starting at like 16, all bets are off. It's very different. You're still going through puberty and those kinds of things. There's nothing like testosterone in a 15 and 16-year-old dude in that way to increase muscle size and those kinds of things. So it's a little bit off, right? But in people that are very advanced lifters, they've been lifting for a very long time, you can get bigger, but it's hard to get a lot of increase in muscle mass without kind of packing on additional, kind of fat mass and things there. That neural adaptation is maybe the only way you can get any stronger. At some point, you've reached your genetic potential for muscle size change. Okay? At some point, you will reach all of that. There's a host of things that contribute to this. Okay? More than we can talk about. One other cool thing, okay? There is an idea in a kind of neural adaptation that we call the crossover effect. What that tells us is if you train with your right arm, your left arm also gets stronger even if it does nothing. Okay? This is because in the brain and in the spinal cord, the neurons in the motor cortex and the neurons in the spinal cord that go to both the right and left side sit in basically the same spot. And so by learning how to use the ones on one side, you also learn how to be better at using the ones on the other side. Okay, there's a lot of fascinating research on this as a rehabilitative use now, right? Anybody have torn your ACL, have any ACL repair people? Okay? Right? How long they wouldn't let you lift weights or do anything with the one you tore for how long afterwards? 3 months, 4 months, right? Something in that range. We're a little more aggressive now than we used to be. Okay? What happens to that side when you don't do things? One, the muscle gets smaller and you get a lot weaker. So what they're looking at doing now is train the other side. Train your good side, and it will help you preserve some strength or not lose as much in the injured side. People that have strokes, right? They cannot use one side of their body very well. So part of their rehab, in addition to trying to use that side, is work out the other side, and it will teach the other side as well. Okay. We have some data from my lab from a few years ago where we did plantar flexion training. So that people do push as hard as they could with their calf, plantar flex as hard as they could. They did 6 sets of 6 maximal contractions. They did it for a month. And we got about a 40% increase in strength in the side that was pushing, and the side that wasn't. Okay, a 40% increase in strength, both sides. Usually you get about half, but we don't really know what's going on with our plantar flexors. People are weak. That's called the crossover effect. Okay, so you got a bad shoulder, something hurts, train the other side. Okay, now comes all of the data that shows us the things that I just showed you. Okay, that I just told you. This here is a measure of motor unit recruitment. We call it voluntary activation. If any of you would like to experience this, please come to my lab today and we can do this. Okay, but what we do is you have a person, so like this is in the quad, and so you would sit and you try to kick as hard as you can, and while you're kicking as hard as you can, we zap your leg with electricity. We put these big electrode pads on. We zap your leg with electricity, with enough electricity to make every muscle fiber in your muscle fire at the exact same moment. And so here's your strength. I'm doing all I can do. We zap you, and your force goes up. If your force goes up, that tells us there were some fibers that you could not activate all by yourself. Okay? And what they're showing here is before training, these folks were at about 85% or so. They could turn on about 85% of their motor units or 85% of their muscle. After training, they're at about 95%. Okay? And then here was their control group that did not train, and they, even though it looks like it went down, this is not a statistically different kind of result in this way. Okay? Training increases the extent to which you can turn on the motor neurons to innervate a muscle. Okay? Now, you can stim the muscle and do this, or if it's the quad, we can stim your femoral nerve. You don't really want us to do that. It's not the most pleasant thing in the world. It's much more pleasant when we did the plantar flexion study, you stim the tibial nerve, and you basically zap the nerve and you turn on everything downstream from all of it from there, so you can assure that things are happening. Okay, but this is how we know that resistance training increases motor unit recruitment. Okay, most people in kind of large muscles, if you're untrained, quads, glutes, pecs, okay. If you're untrained, you're probably able to recruit between about 80 and 90% of the motor units in that muscle. Most folks are missing 10 or 15% if you're untrained. Highly trained people will get very, very near 100%. Okay. Now, in smaller muscles like bicep, okay, triceps, because our muscles are smaller and we do things where we do more things where we carry stuff in our everyday lives, we're usually better at recruiting almost all of our motor units in our small muscles than we are in our big ones. So if you look at kind of average untrained people in their bicep, it's like 90 to 95% in that range, whereas kind of quads and big things are going to be even lower. Okay. So that's where some of our neural adaptations are going to come from. All right, this next thing I'm going to show you guys here, these are very old data. These data here were published in 1981. I was younger than Ellis at that point when these came out. This is going to demonstrate, this panel here is going to demonstrate an idea of training specificity. Okay, so what we have here is joint torque. So quad force multiplied by the moment arm and the knee. Okay, and then on the x-axis is contraction velocity. What should happen as I contract faster? Constantly as I go faster, what happens for force? Goes down. Good. Y'all doing pretty well with that on the test. I appreciate that. So we have people that trained moving at 90-ish degrees per second. So a kind of moderate velocity. We then had people that trained at 240 degrees per second. So really fast. Okay, really fast in the extension. These people are going to generate less force when they're doing it. So that's one of our issues. These folks are going slower. We have before training in the black line, after training in the dashed line. So we're testing them at slow velocities, okay, out to faster velocities. So when I train slow, if you just look at those two lines, where's there the biggest difference? Where's there the largest increase? What kind of contraction? Train slow. Slow, right? Slow contraction velocity when I test, I train slow, larger increases here than out here when I train fast. Okay? In the group that trained fast, they didn't get faster at slow velocities, but they did get faster at fast velocity. Okay? One of the issues here is they don't generate very much force. You can squint real hard and think that this and this are roughly the same in some ways. So we probably should train relatively slow. But this tells us something. This is about specificity. Whatever you're doing, that's the place you're going to get better. Okay? Or the most better. That's terrible English, right? In that particular way. Okay. Now, again, specificity. This is a kind of an earlier version of what I showed you guys from the Hubel study, where we've got the percent increase in strength during dynamic contractions, okay, here, versus isometric contractions. So again, I think this is a bicep study, and dynamic contractions, they got about 150% of an increase in strength for the weights they could use when they train. And their isometric strength went up, I don't know, 15 or 20%. Okay. So again, if I trained isometrically, bigger increase isometrically. If I train dynamically, I get a bigger increase in strength when I do that. All of this is likely dependent upon the ability of the brain to turn on motor units at that particular velocity or through that particular range of motion. Whatever you're doing when you train, that's what you get better at. Okay? That's what you get better. And
So, looking at that first graph again, and just the emphasis on gaining more strength.
Yeah.
Movements and going slowly,
Mhm.
does that mean that it can be beneficial to do like whatever concentric movements you're doing for resistance training, doing it slower to generate more force and to get stronger in that way?
so, in a very general sense, yes. I would look at these two things and say that bang for your buck in a regular person, train slower rather than faster, because you're going to get an increase at slow velocities and reasonably similar ones at really fast velocities. Most people in their everyday life aren't trying to go at like 5 radians per second, which is super duper fast. We can figure out what that is, right? There's 2 pi radians in a circle. In a circle, I have to get us to 360. Yeah. My trig is escaping me. So we're at about 360-ish, a little bit under that kind of deal out there. Okay. So I think that would be important. But there's a little bit different that if you're an athlete and what you got to do is to go really fast sometimes, then sometimes you need to try to go fast because any little bit of an increase that you can get out here over this is gonna be a little bit helpful as well. Now, but this is like 90 degrees per second is still like, like that's like a 2-second bicep contraction or something, right? That's not like really slow in that way. When you go really slow, in theory, you should be able to generate more force. So if one of the things that you want to do is to learn how to maximize absolute force production, then you got to lift heavy. And by lifting heavy, by necessity, it's going to have to be really slow. Okay. Okay. Other questions? No? Okay. Another very famous study here. It was conducted at the Orange University to the south of here, so we won't acknowledge that part of it. But the lead author Enzo ended up going back to Canada, so that was okay. They did knee extension training, so they did knee extensions, and then you can see knee extension strength going up, and then this right here, which you can see is an electromyogram, so it's activity from the biceps femoris while they were doing these knee extensions and all of that. And what you will note basically is that after about 2 weeks or maybe a week or two, one of the neural adaptations that we get is you turn off you silence the antagonist muscle to a little bit of an extent. That's one of the ways that we get more strength, right? For the same ability to recruit motor unit, the same muscle size that's turned on, there's less antagonist force that has to be overcome to get our movement. And so it's wild that it was the early 90s and when we figured all of this out. This has been very kind of commonly repeated over time when we look at things like all of this. Okay. And so part of this likely is due to changes in Golgi tendon sensitivity. Okay, Golgi tendon shuts off the agonist, turns on the antagonist, and so by doing this, you can silence these kinds of things. So we have some data from a thesis project of one of my former master's students that you see things like this after one bout of eccentric exercise. So one bout of heavy bicep curls, we could see 6 weeks later that there was reduced tricep activation when you repeated doing kind of heavy eccentric exercise. So you don't have to do things very often. And you can get these kind of lasting changes in antagonist kind of co-activation. Okay, I'll finish with one last thing again. And this is not these graphs are kind of confusing, but I'll give you just sort of the top line. Okay. Anybody ever had, maybe you read an article, you have a friend, you get into an argument with someone about, should I do curls like this, right? One dumbbell in each, or should I do them bilateral with the preacher curl ball, okay? Or something. The end thing is it really doesn't matter that much, okay? But this was a study that attempted to look at something like that to try to figure out what we're going to get, okay? And so these data right here are two-handed sort of bilateral curl, 1 rep max. Here is unilateral 1 rep max. They had one group that trained for 12 weeks bilaterally, and they had one group that trained unilaterally, and they essentially tried to match the amount of work that they were doing in the number of contractions. Specificity would tell us if I train bilaterally, where am I going to get the largest neural adaptation? If I train doing this, and then I test my strength doing either this with both of them or each of them by themselves, if I train bilaterally, where should I get the biggest increase in strength? Bilateral. And indeed, that is exactly what they saw. You train bilaterally, you get more strength when we test you bilaterally than you do unilaterally. When you train unilaterally, you get more of an increase in strength on the unilateral than you do doing bilateral. So the question is, one better than the other? I don't know. I mean, are we going to split hairs over, I got 110% better versus 120% better? I mean, for some people that may matter, right? I mean, that may be of great import, okay? But I look and I think, we're pretty freaking similar on these things, although they may statistically, one may be a little bit better than the other. So then the question is, well, what are you gonna have to do in your everyday life, right? Is there a need for whatever task you do or sports you play to do things with one arm, kind of separately from both of them at the same time? Then maybe you want to train unilaterally, okay? But for most people, you're gonna think about the same thing, so it's not that big of a deal, okay? It's not that big of a deal. The thing that matters is you train, right? And that will be sort of my take home for today, okay? As I put a little summary about our neural adaptations up here. What I'm gonna tell you guys, and we'll get more into this next Monday, is to me, people that want to tell you and make a big fuss over your sets and your reps and your unilateral versus bilateral and those kinds of things are trying to sell you something. Okay? They're trying to sell you something. Their way of training, their way of something. Okay? The big thing is go 80, 85, 90% of your strength and hypertrophy gains are going to be mostly from going 2 or 3 times per week consistently for 8 weeks, 12 weeks, 16 weeks. Go and do something, and when it gets easy, make it hard again. And you're better off than like half of the people that do resistance training. Okay? Are there some things we can do in the margins at the end? Yes. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of those on Monday, but that's kind of the big take. Okay? All right, so we'll do contractile adaptations and things on Monday. We will likely have our quiz over this on at the end of class on Monday as well. All right? Have a good weekend. Make good choices. Horns down, all right? If you're Arkansas fan, I can totally get behind it. Always there. Horns down. Okay, any more questions?
Go ahead.